Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in. Hello, everybody. Hi, folks. Welcome in. Good to hear. Janine, Ishal, good afternoon. Aaron, K.E., Lynn, hello. Lynn, hello. Hi, Milena, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in. Hi, Michael. How's it going? Good afternoon, Monica. Exclamation marks. Tanya, hello. Welcome in, folks. Last class of the day. You're almost free. And it's a good one today. I don't mind telling you, folks. I'll pat myself on the back on this one. I sound different with the headset. I know my second period class, I didn't want to use my wireless ones today. They kind of like go right in my ear, and I'm not wild about wearing them all day. So I was like, I gotta let my ears breathe a little. And then my period 2 class was like, yo, you sound great. It sounds great. It's so crystal clear. We can hear you. There's no buzz. It's perfect. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll use these then. So good to know that sounds better. Hopefully that makes the videos a little bit more palatable. Sounds like a gamer headset. Yes, it is indeed a gamer headset. I would agree with you on that one. I play many a video games with this headset on. Oh, geez. The games that I'm playing now, I'm playing Stellaris. I really like Stellaris. It's like a strategy game. I'm playing Outriders. It just came out with my brothers. I play Smite. I play Heroes of the Storm. I play quite a bit of a few video games. I kind of want to play Heroes of the Storm later today, actually. Now that you mention it, me talking about it. I am cool. Thank you, Arpitha. I know that. I know. I am cool. Thank you. I'll be sure to tell everyone who thinks I'm not cool that my students think I'm cool. So this is like the equivalent. It's not like the equivalent. It's actually better. But that's like the people who are like, my mom thinks I'm cool. This is like the step above it. My students think I'm cool. So in your face, world, in your face. All right, folks. So I'll give everyone another couple of minutes. I'm going to get attendance going, and we can get started on our lesson today because it's a good one. I want to give you some time at the end of the day to kind of decompress a little, get some of the homework done. And yeah, my hope is that... What the heck? What happened, Shelly? Your headset. Oh, yes. Everyone is saying how crystal clear it is and how it's different. So changing things up today a little bit. Glad to see that it's well received. It can hear me well and it works well. What kind is it? MPOW? I don't know. It was like one of the cheapest ones that had good reviews. So, and it's comfortable. It fits my head. I looked up when I Google things like my gaming headsets. I look up cheap. I look up works well. I look up fits my head. And then I picked the one that's not too crazy expensive, but not too crazy cheap either. Because usually if it's like too cheap, it like breaks pretty quick. And then you got to buy a new one. And then I'm like, I'm spending $30 twice instead of $60 once, or $80 once instead of $50 twice. Anyways, the whole point of it is it's a pretty good headset. My hope is that you can hear me well. And I guess if I've had rave reviews so far with how it sounds, so I'll keep using it. And I like it. Like I said, my wireless headphones, they got to go right in my ears because they're Galaxy Buds. And I don't like the pressure that it puts on my eardrum based on how much I talk and how much I wear them, right? Like I wear them to teach. I wear them if I go for a run or whatever. It's like I'm constantly wearing them. Yeah, my hair hides them now, but at the time you could kind of tell last year, I guess, when I would use them. But yeah, and it's good because then I can keep mobile. I can still hear everything. And like if I'm looking at something, I'm not caught. Like the one thing I don't like is that it's wired, but it's the fidelity is quite good. So I just kind of fit it in, and hopefully it doesn't get tangled up on anything. So all right, good chat about gaming headsets and audio quality and all that jazz. I'm going to take attendance real quick, and then we can get started. Aaron, Alex, Arpitha, Cheryl, Diana's here. Jalen. Is that everyone? 26, 27. Hallie's here. Tanya, Tahira, Sitha, Shelly, Seema, Sama, no Rachel, Naman, Monica, the whole 9 yards. Everyone else is here. Okay, cool. All right, let's get started. when the rest of the people come in, hopefully they'll join and we can go from there. So a couple of things I wanted to talk with you about. Oops. There we go. So your note looks like this today. It's a PowerPoint slide just because I thought that it flowed really well with regards to what I will have you do next week as well, utilizing some of these questions and topics, but we'll talk more about that next week during our house days. So this is your note. It's in your Google Drive, lesson 1, evolution change over time. Those of you who like following along and writing down stuff, that's the document you can make a copy of to write down things in. There's also an evolution change over time PowerPoint slide. That's what I will be teaching you from. So if you want to follow along on that as well, I recommend it. Entirely up to you. Those of you who like writing your notes by hand, hopefully you're writing down the important bits. I'll talk about that in a second when I show you the notes that you'll need to write down, okay? Because I really want to try to introduce that idea, this unit, in terms of helping you write down good notes. I know a lot of you write down literally everything that's on the screen, and that's not good. I mean, it's fine. But your brain just doesn't really process it all. Focusing on the important things is a skill to learn and develop. And again, I'm speaking from experience here. I didn't really learn how to do this until second or third year of university. So for the first year and a half of all my classes, I would just kind of write down everything the professor said or everything that was on the screen. And I got to say, it sucked. My hand hurt at the end of every day. I didn't even like doing it for some classes, so I stopped, and then I stopped anyways. I want to help you develop good skills to like take good notes. I think it's important, especially in biology. There's a lot of writing to do, but it will help you in other classes as well. So I'll kind of give a brief intro on how I write notes. I'll tell you what's important. And my hope is that you'll learn to organically just listen to what I say and see the key ideas on the screen and only write those as we go. So we'll start taking some notes in a bit, but I want to just kind of give you a brief overview of the lesson as well as the unit. Our first lesson in Unit 3 is evolution or change over time. And it's important to think about the goals for this unit because I'm going to give you many different things that you will utilize and learn with in this unit. You're going to explain how living things are going to change over time. Evolution is a change over a long period of time. The way we perceive time, the way we consider time, is very, very small in the context of evolution as a whole, because evolution happens over hundreds of thousands of millions of hundreds of millions of years. And in order to appreciate it fully, that change over time, we need to start thinking about it in that context. So hopefully we'll be able to learn how to think that way. We're going to assess many different types of evidence that support theories of evolution. At the end of the day, we are learning about a theory of evolution. It is not a fact. I mean, depending on who you ask. But again, this is the theory of evolution, not the fact of evolution, not the suggestion of evolution. This is the theory of evolution. And I'm going to look at different types of support, different types of ideas that help to contribute to it, and overall what it means to be a theory versus a fact versus an idea. We're then going to look at the contributions of one Charles Darwin, as well as other scientists within the field. Many, many, many scientists over the last 300 years have contributed to the ideas of evolution, but it was Sir Charles Darwin in the 19th century, that really started the whole thing and really allowed for us to come to where we are today to kind of look at the theory of evolution, the evidence that was found and curated and put together, and put it all in context for what we need to know for this course, specifically in terms of evolution. We're going to look at the process of natural selection. It's an idea you may have heard before. We will spend a great deal of time talking about it throughout this course, specifically the next couple of units. We will then look at examples of modern advances in science that help us to understand evolution and how we can utilize it and how we have utilized it over the course of human species time, or history, I should say. And then lastly, we're going to outline the time of major events that have happened on this Earth. The Earth is 4.2 billion years old, give or take a couple 100 million years. So understanding how the planet has changed over that course of time will really help us to appreciate how it connects with evolution and organisms as a whole. So those are the main ideas for this unit that we are going to be learning. It's a lot of big, like I said, big ideas that I think are really fascinating to talk about and study. And I really want to try to spend some time just really focusing on that, as opposed to being like, oh dear God, when did Charles Darwin I don't want that for this unit. I really want you to take it in as something that's exciting and interesting And I really want you to make a connection with it because I maintain, I said it, I probably said it last unit, but I maintain this is probably one of the most incredible, some of these ideas and theories that you learn, the concepts that you learn in this unit, many of you will come away with this. And it, to me, still to this day, some of the ideas in this unit are some of the most fantastic, magnificent, incredible things I've ever learned or heard of in my life. So I'm hopeful that you will come away feeling something similar for this, because truly it is wonderful to consider this. All right. So before we get into the notes, I really want you to take a look at some of these questions. I'm only going to go through a couple of them because I want to save a few of them for the discussion next week that we will have in our house groups. So it'll be important to kind of consider these questions for this unit, but I really want to spend more time next week talking about it. Cell theory and atomic theory were not always widely accepted. Do you accept these scientific theories as valid? If so, why? I find this question interesting to consider, or these questions interesting to consider, because when you consider cell theory specifically, if you look at viruses and go, yeah, viruses are alive, I don't care what anyone says, then the cell theory isn't quite for you, because the cell theory states that viruses are not alive. And that's okay. There are actually many virologists, evolutionary biologists, and biologists as a whole that look at the cell theory and say it needs to change. It needs to change to accommodate for viruses. And there are many scientists that say, oh, no, 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 no. And many scientists that go, oh, yes, 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 yes. And it's important to have that discussion and that debate, because ultimately we are talking about theories here. We are talking about the idea that has developed into a theory over evidence that has supported these concepts. And it is important to discuss and debate them. And if you do not widely accept these ideas, it's important to consider the evidence for and against. No one is going to sit here and say that, no, cell theory is wrong. Everything's made out of spaghetti. No one says that. Okay. No one has that thought process. No one has those ideas. And if they did, it would be very easy to disprove, because we can, with fact, show that cells are not made out of spaghetti. They're made out of cellular processes and stuff like that. Yeah, spaghetti. I don't know. Spaghetti was the first thing that came to mind. Yeah. Wait, so it can't be confirmed if viruses are alive or not. Well, that's the interest. Yes, I only had a small lunch today. But yeah, that's the interesting thing, Diana, right? Like, how do you say that viruses are alive or not in terms of cell theory? Why hasn't someone looked into this? Well, we have been for the last 45 years, and they've been debating it, whether cells and viruses are supposed to be considered in the same group. We've kind of come to a conclusion. I'm saying all of this, of course, I'm leading the witness, so to speak, because I do know of the overall conclusion. But ultimately, viruses kind of fit into their own area of life. And so cell theory is one that is important, but it's contextual. The conclusion is that viruses and cells are both alive. They're just alive differently. And the main reason for the debate is like all things in biology, classification, right? Do viruses belong to the 6 kingdoms? Are they their own thing? Are they something separate? Are they something combined? Those are a little bit above our pay grade. It's a little bit more for evolutionary and genomics and proteomics in 2nd and 3rd year. And you will get to that point, right? You'll get to that point. And you will have professors that say that viruses are not alive. And you will have professors that say viruses are alive. It just doesn't subscribe to the cell theory. And then you'll have professors that say that the cell theory is wrong and viruses should be included and we need to change it. There's so many different ways you can approach it. And I think that's why it's so important to consider these scientific theories as ideas that have changed over time. And it must be flexible to allow for new discoveries and new evidence, because we're finding new things every day, folks. Every single day we learn something new with regards to how the world works. And it is important that we're able to stay flexible, both personally and as a scientific community. It's important that we stay flexible so we can incorporate these new understandings and these new this new evidence into the ideas and theories that we've developed. That to me is the true hallmark of science. Keeping that open mind, maintaining that flexibility to continue to learn new concepts, and as new evidence arises, to not be so rigid and biased towards ideas. And again, we're all guilty of it, myself included. I'm very, very rigid in some ways, and I have to constantly remind myself that these things change, and it's important to not be so rigid in them. And it's not only important in day-to-day life, but for these scientific theories and ideas that we will study. So that's a good preamble question to kind of connect to some of the ideas that we will learn in this class, specifically with regards to evolution, as well as this unit and the rest of this course. The overall idea that scientific theory changes over time, and that flexibility really allows for us to truly make amazing discoveries and share those discoveries with everyone. I'll skip this one. I'll save it for next week. I'll also skip this one and save it for next week. And this one I want to spend a bit of time talking about because we will connect it to this lesson in terms of mutations. So we looked at mutations yesterday. We looked at some of the mutations that happen both in a genetic component or in a chromosomal component. I mean, both are genetic components, but in a DNA and in the chromosome. And these mutations can result in heritable changes. And that heritable change is seen in the phenotype of an individual, and it potentially could be passed on. So the long-term effects of mutations accumulated over time allow for us to start to connect some of these ideas to genetics. Now, when you think about ways with which this can connect to genetics, be mindful of the ideas that we learned in that unit. Be mindful of the terminology that you are very carefully avoiding in your activity in your Unit 2 assignment. I did it purposefully to connect to some of the concepts that we are learning in this unit, specifically with this lesson, because as we move through this lesson, you'll start to see how evolution and genetics connects. And to me, it's one of the most beautiful ideas that we can consider, the hardcore aspect of that central dogma of biology, DNA to RNA to protein to phenotype. We see these transformations from DNA to actual things that give us traits. And now we can start to consider it in an evolutionary context to make that connection between how evolution works and why genetics plays such a big role in it. So be mindful of this question as we move on through this lesson, okay? So as I alluded to at the start, this is where for those of you following along, this is where you will start to write down the note, okay? So this is the first section of the note. You should be writing down parts of this. Now, I know many of you, I know many of you, you'll look at, okay, I gave you rapid change, and you're going to write down everything. And that's fine. I get it. I take the necessary time because I think it's my job to in grade 11 to pace it so that if you do write down this entire thing, I'm not like, well, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. And then I skip over it and move on. And you're like, oh, that's not the job, I think. However, once you get to grade 12, it will get challenging to write everything down. And then once you go off to university, it's damn near impossible to get everything down that you see in the day. You have 3 lectures that are 3.5 hours long or 2.5 hours long, and you're going to write for 7.5 hours? It's not feasible. It's not feasible. Okay. So there's ways around it so that you can avoid writing down every single thing as you go. So let's talk about that in the context of this slide, and then I'll stop and I'll stop talking about it in terms of this concept, and we'll just focus on the material. But if I gave you the rapid change part, what rapid change is, we can observe in the moment. I would not write this whole down. I would write observes in the moment or observe in the moment. And then instead of saying, for example, I go EX, a spontaneous base pair mutation caused by chemical change. Here, I would just have base pair mutation. You could write down spontaneous too if you wanted, but I really just need to know that this is as a result of a base pair mutation that can be observed in the moment. Okay, this is a base pair mutation that can be observed in the moment. So a rapid change is observed in the moment. Example, base pair mutation. That gives you the gist of it. It gives you the gist of it, right? You don't really need any more information outside of the contextual ideas of chemical change. It could be radiation change, but you should know that already from the note you took yesterday, okay? Does that make sense what I'm kind of talking about here on how to write down notes? Is this something that makes sense? Useful, not useful? Helpful, not helpful? Don't care, care? Tired, not tired? Yes, Karen, not tired. This is going to take some time to get used to. Yes. Like the shorthand note taking. I agree, Tahira. In 3 years' time, when you're in second year and your professor puts a slide that has 6 sentences and she spends 3 seconds talking about it, well, not 3 seconds, 30 seconds talking about it, you'll remind me. Most professors, I would say, like you had access to all these notes, right? I posted these all in one shot. Most students will print them out and then they just write anecdotal stuff on top of that note. Love that idea. Love that idea. Or on your iPad or on your phone, or sorry, your computer, they'll have the notes in front of them and they'll add extra stuff that the professor says. Love that idea. But one thing at a time. We'll get there. All right, let's take a look at the next part. So gradual change. You got this from me, yeah? Gradual change. I told you that. That's written down in the note. And then the actual concept is that it's the change that is observed over long periods of time. Now, it will not be likely seen day to day. Even when I say that, the change that can be observed over long periods of time, I really try to make my cadence, how I speak and the pace that I speak, over the important stuff. I really try to take my time with how I say it. So when you hear how I say it, the change that can be observed over a long period of time. What's the important part there? A long period of time. It's over a long period of time. It will not likely be seen day to day. Now, do you have to write down not likely seen day to day? No, because over a long period of time is not day to day. It's thousands of generations or hundreds of days, years, millions of years even. So again, for example, I'll add a little tiny example part. That mutation becoming more and more frequent in the population over many generations. Again, what is the most important thing here? That a mutation becoming more and more frequent in a population over many generations, becoming more and more frequent. Oops. Yeah. So it's becoming more and more frequent in a population over many generations. So as you see here, I highlighted about 20 words, and there's about 50 words on the page. Okay. Again, it will take some time to hear, as you alluded to. It takes time to get used to it, but I think it's an important skill to start developing now, because worst case scenario, you got to write down a few extra words because you're not sure if you missed something important. All right. Come grade 12, come first year, come second year and beyond, it's harder to develop that skill. Speaking from experience, I'm glad I can help you develop this skill now while it's still low stakes and a little bit easier. All right, so that's the last I want to speak about note taking. I'll go through the lesson normally now, and whatever you choose to write down is entirely up to you. There are going to be some parts that it's just fill in the blank. There are going to be some parts where you have to write down everything if you want to. I'm not going to say do it one way or the other. I really just want to try to help you understand that you do not have to write down everything in order to get the gist of it or the important parts. Okay? So let's take a look at mutations. We talked about mutations yesterday. We talked about them in the individual term. Now we're going to look at it as a source of genetic variation, and we're going to spend some time talking about it in the context of evolution, because mutations can create new genes and therefore it creates new genetic information. Mutations create new genetic information. This new genetic information could affect the individual's DNA who's mutated. So it could affect a single individual, right? It can affect that individual depending on that mutation. So for example, if you have skin cancer, right? The skin cells, which are somatic cells, receive too much radiation, mutate, and they give you what's called skin cancer. That is the individual affected. It can also affect their offsprings, because depending on the mutation, if it's non-disjunction or mutation in the zygote at fertilization, all those two examples can cause that reproduction mutation to be passed on. So this mutation can be passed on to their offspring. Where can we get some of the radiation from? Like, what are some examples? The sun is usually one. Microwave radiation. There is radon radiation, which is a natural occurring gas that's radioactive. There's uranium, selenium, Potassium are some types of atoms that can produce radiation in large quantities. All of those are ways with which radiation can, X-rays, too many X-rays, gamma rays, if you're too close to, if you're working in nuclear power plants and you aren't using the correct protection or something, an accident happens. Those are some examples with regards to mutations as a result of radiation. Yeah, no worries. And the last thing I want to talk about with mutations in this context is that they have the potential to affect future generations. So if that mutation is passed on, it can affect future generations because then it will also be passed on once that organism comes to term. All right. So when we look at the types of mutations, this is the big thing. This is the main idea that I really want to focus on for this lesson. This is the concept I really want to stress as we move through this lesson. The idea that there are three main types of mutations, and these three main types of mutations are going to connect to some things we learned in Unit 2, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Let me just finish taking attendance. Did it work? Yes, it did. Excellent. So a neutral mutation changes to the DNA that have no immediate effect, meaning there is no benefit, there's no harm, there's no good, there's no bad. It's a neutral mutation. So, for example, a mutation in a letter, okay, strike that. You can strike this. Oops. There we go. There we go. Get rid of the there. You don't need that. A mutation in a letter from C to G may still produce the same final protein and therefore have no effects. Now, you'll learn why that happens in grade 12. I won't go into too much detail about why that happens for grade 11. A lot of it has to do with the fact that C and G are base pair partners, but there is more to it than that. And you will focus on that in grade 12 biology in some way. And remember me fondly when that happens. If I teach you grade 12 biology for whatever reason next year, then I'll remind you of this point. Because at the end of the day, it's not really important for us to understand how a neutral mutation works per se. It's just that there are neutral mutations that have no immediate effect to that organism. Okay? So no immediate effect, neutral mutation. So I have a question about the rapid and slow change. Yeah, sure. Go for it, Kyle. Anamnesis was the ancestor of human. The evolution that they suddenly stood up instead of using both hands and legs to walk is rapid or slow change. Well, I'll ping that back at you because yes, I like that question. But when you look at some of the ancestor species, and we will talk a little bit about this as we move towards the end of this unit, but when you take a look at some of the ancestor species, specifically chimpanzees and gorillas, they can walk on their hind legs. It's usually a show of dominance, right? It's usually a show of dominance when a male gorilla, for example, it charges on all four and then it stands on its hind legs and beats its chest in a display of dominance, right? You've all kind of seen that before, yes? Or you have an idea of what I'm talking about? Yeah. So that is a trait as a display of dominance. Now, as we connect some of those behaviors of our predecessor species, we start to see that not only did it provide a benefit as like a challenge to other males, but it also allowed for that species, when they stood on their hind legs, to see over the grasslands. And if they could see over the grasslands, they could see predators coming. So as a result of that combination, it definitely served a purpose, right? It served a purpose. It was used for mating. It was used for challenging challenging other males, but it also served multiple purposes, right? So it's not just all of a sudden, Anamnesis just like stood up and was like, oh, this is amazing. We should do this from now on. There's so many other factors that kind of come into play here, right? Because it was already kind of present in precursor species. And on top of that, it served other functions outside of just kind of standing up and being like, oh, I can see like 5 feet higher. So yes, it's kind of a rapid thing in the sense that all of a sudden, quote unquote, a species starts to walk on their back legs and not on their front and forehead legs, right? But it's also a slow change because it slowly went from a display of dominance to a functional usage of your verticality to see species that might hunt you. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if it quite answers your question, because I think you're trying to see if it's a rapid or a slow change. And the answer is that it's more of a slow change, but there are some aspects that were rapid and others that were more slow. So standing up is not a must for survival, because I thought organisms change through the years because they adapt to the environment to survive. Yes. So we'll talk about that in lesson 3 and 4. The standing isn't a must for survival, obviously, because many of our predecessor species and ancestry species, they still utilize all 4 for their movement. But humans or our predecessor species that stood on our back legs, it allowed for greater chances of survival, right? It allowed for greater chances of survival because of several different reasons, which we'll kind of talk a little bit about. One of which, it could see predators. It could manipulate tools, with which we are, very good at. We could use our hands for self-defense a little bit better. There's other factors that kind of come into play here. Yeah, it really depends on the situation and environment, which we will consider as well. So I like that we're getting ahead of ourselves a little, but honestly, it's a good question to have. I don't mind kind of reaching ahead. And when we get to that point, I'll be like, hey, remember that one time we had that conversation about it? Because it's not just if humans don't stand up, they die, right? Because if that were the case, babies take a solid year to learn how to walk, right? If it was a must, babies would be born and not even days, hours later, like most species, right? When you think about most species, elephants are a great example. An elephant is born, and within an hour, it is able to walk. Normal, like it will walk for the rest of its life. Whereas humans we're blobs. For the first 6 months, we're useless. 100% reliance on our parents. Can't do a thing. You put a baby in the wild that's born, it's dead within weeks, days even, right? But other animals, they need to do things right from the get-go. This is how I view babies. But it's because it's not just a must for survival, because there are other factors at play, right? Because if standing and walking was a must, babies could do it right from the get-go, and they can't. They can't. There's other factors that combine here. And I think it's important to consider that, Kyle, because it's a great question. And it's a great way to link those. Petition to send all babies to the wild. Yeah, 0 would come back. 0 would come back. Not a baby would come back. It'd be game over for that generation. So yeah, that kind of frames the overall concepts we'll talk about in this unit. Survival of the fittest. Unfortunately, there would be 0 fitness, which again, we'll talk about as we move. I know you're all excited to get into this unit, which I love. As we get to those concepts, you'll start to be able to be like, oh, that's what that means. Or, oh, that's why that kind of happens. Hopefully. Yeah, no neck muscles. So does that mean the ancient humans that live with the dangerous animals together in the forest can have offspring that walk more sooner? Not necessarily. What more likely happened, which kind of allows for what we have today. I mean, I don't think any of you have children, but go ask your parents, right? After this class is over, when you have a chance to talk to them, ask your parents, hey, when I was born, how much did you protect me? Right? Because every new parent, I've seen it in my family members that have children. As soon as their child is even remotely close to a little bit of danger, what do you notice in those parents? Holy smokes. You ever watch those? I don't know if they're on like YouTube or whatever, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, TikTok. You ever watch the like dad reaction videos of where the dad is like not paying attention and all of a sudden they reach out and catch their child who's about to fall? That is a huge evolutionary response because, at that time, our precursor species that had a lot of dangerous animals around, they had to protect this blob of a child for like 2 years before it could actually do anything, if not longer. And so that urge to protect our children is an incredibly strong biological drive in humans. Very, 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 very few humans will look at their offspring and say, I'm sure they'll be fine. Most parents, if not all parents, look at that newborn baby and they will give their life for that child. And that drive to keep their child alive and protect them, that's as a result of those ancient humans that lived with very dangerous animals and they had to protect their children. The ones that protected their children, that worried and be like, oh my God, there's a tiger. Those parents passed on that worry to their children because it allowed for them to survive, right? We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but that's some of the overall ideas of why anxiety and depression exist. They're evolutionary byproducts of trying to survive in those types of environments. Killing their own children is one of the highest crime rates in women, isn't it? I think so. Infanticide. I think what Diana's saying is like, infanticide or like the killing of a child, it usually happens. It's like a pretty high ratio of females to males in terms of who does it, right? Like violent crimes are predominantly done by males, whereas infanticide or murder of children or their own children is higher ratio of females to males. I think that's what you're saying, right, Diana?
Yeah, that's what I meant. It's called filicide, I think.
That's the one. Yeah. Filicide, where they kill their children. Because again, right, like, not to get too into it, but that evolutionary drive isn't as strong for some of those people. And as a result of which, it's easier for them to kind of freak out and be like, oh my God, this child, I got to feed it. And then a dark pathway can be taken potentially. So a little off topic, but that's okay. Honestly, these conversations are the reason why we teach and learn biology, because it's exciting to have these conversations, right? Like it's important to learn these things and to kind of put them in the context. And thankfully, I feel a little bit capable in it because I do this for a living. So good chats, folks. Good chats. All right. Kyle, if there's any more questions, they're great questions. I want to try to finish this lesson before the end of the period, so you have a bit of time. So don't worry, we will cover some of these content ideas as we move through this unit, okay? But great questions. Awesome. Yeah, no worries, Kyle. All right, let's take a look at the next type of mutation because it's important to consider harmful mutations. Now, the key thing here I need you to think of, a mutation is only harmful if it reduces reproductive success of an individual. What that means is if an individual is not able to survive long enough to reproduce, it's as a result of a harmful mutation. It's as a result of a harmful mutation. These harmful mutations do not tend to accumulate in populations over time because these individuals cannot survive or reproduce. For example, cystic fibrosis. That's a mutation-caused disease that allows for fluid buildup in the lungs, and it presents as shortness of breath, and it can kill the person over time if it's not managed with medication and the right diet. And as a result of which, people with cystic fibrosis die before they are able, or they are unable to reproduce due to the genetic disorder that they are afflicted with. Whether it's because they're unable to perform the act of sexual reproduction because it's they're physically weak and they cannot do it, or they end up dying as a result of the severity of cystic fibrosis. And before they pass on their genes, they are unable to. So we see that as a harmful mutation. It reduces the reproductive success of an individual. Now, when we say does not accumulate in the population, what kind of trait are we talking about there? What kind of trait are we talking about there? What kind of trait is seen less frequently in a population? What kind of trait is seen less frequently in a population? Recessive traits. Recessive traits. Now, I don't want you to think and automatically link recessive traits with harmful. Okay, it's not always the case. But in many species, we will see examples where it's not harmful in the classical sense, right? When you say harmful, you're like, ouch, some harm will come to me. Harmful in the context of evolution reduces the reproductive chances of an individual. It doesn't kill them always. It just reduces the reproductive abilities potentially. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, blue eyes, that's a recessive trait, but people with blue eyes reproduce no problem. Yes, in humans, it's a little bit more multifaceted. It's not always going to be the case, but we'll talk about it in other types of organisms that are less complex than humans, and you'll start to see the idea that these recessive traits are recessive for a reason, because it does not allow for them to reproduce as successfully. And in fact, there are some genetic disorders that people with recessive traits can be more prone to as a result of which. And so it changes the way we kind of look at that connection between genetics and evolution. Okay. Does that make sense how I connected those two things? Mm-hmm. Alrighty, so the last type of mutation I want to spend some time talking about is a beneficial mutation. Again, don't think of beneficial or harmful in any other way outside of the idea that it increases or decreases reproductive success. So a beneficial mutation increases reproductive success for an individual. These mutations will become more frequent in a population over time. What do we call more frequently occurring traits in a population? What are those called? Dominant traits. We start to see dominant traits that are allowing for reproductive success to be increased. We see those more frequently showing up. You see them more frequently showing up in the population over time, as it gives individuals a better chance to reproduce and survive in their environment. Okay, and I'll talk about eye color more as we go through of this unit, because it does come up, believe it or not, in terms of recessive dominant traits, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on to make that connection. But I'll save it. I'll leave it as a bit of a teaser for the next couple of days and week or so until it comes up again in the idea of evolution of traits. So again, the main reason I wanted to hammer home this point that beneficial and harmful does not always mean disease or no disease, because a beneficial mutation is the trait or mutation that causes sickle cell. Now, sickle cell normally, just in a vacuum, it reduces your ability to dissolve oxygen in your blood, increases shortness of breath, allows for you to not do physical activity as much. So sickle cell trait is not good in general. However, in the parts of the world where malaria runs rampant and malaria can kill at a much higher rate than sickle cell trait does, this sickle cell trait allows for a high resistance to malaria. So in parts of the world, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, if you have the sickle cell trait, you are more likely to survive malaria or not get it at all. And if you do that, guess what you can do in 20 years or 30 years or however long it is that you survive to? You can reproduce and pass on your genetic information. So sickle cell anemia is a dominant trait in many places of the world where there is high concentrations of malaria. The sickle cell trait, not the sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is when two sickle cell individuals come together. You want sickle cell trait, like a carrier, if you will, because we'll talk about it later on when we do some Punnett squares in terms of evolution. But the sickle cell trait is what you want. Sickle cell anemia is the bad version of what happens. So it's only dominant in specific kinds of humans. Yes. So if you were to look at the overall world population, the sickle cell trait does not show up as dominant. It's kind of co-dominant-ish. However, in parts of Africa, and majority of Africa, I would say, and parts of the Southeast Asia, in parts of the Pacific Islands, the sickle cell trait is the dominant trait. And why? Because malaria exists in those places. There ain't no malaria in Northern Ontario. Yeah, we'll talk about blue eye colored. We'll talk about that later, Arpitha, because that is a trait that only exists in majority of populations that have very specific environmental conditions. And I want to save that for later because it's really fascinating to consider. Cool. All right. So beneficial mutations, neutral mutations, harmful mutations. So we've kind of talked a lot about this idea, this concept of mutations and how humans can be impacted by it. And the one that's consistently coming up for us is the idea of antibiotic resistant drugs, right? You've seen this diagram before where a bacteria exists, antibiotics kill all but the few of antibiotic resistant cells. These drug resistant cells are allowed to take over and reproduce. And then the bacteria that are able to reproduce, they end up transferring their DNA to non-resistant bacteria and give them some resistance, and that's a form of conjugation and binary fission. So again, we've seen this idea. This is all for the most part not new, but the big thing, the big idea here is that as a result of this antibiotic resistance, this is a shortcut version of evolution. The frequency of a trait has changed, and that's what evolution is. The frequency of a trait changing. If we start to see that happen, that is what we can consider evolution. As that antibacteria or antibiotic kills off the bacteria that are not resistant, it allows for the resistant ones to reproduce and survive, and we have a form of evolution. So the big takeaway for this is that this mutation is beneficial for bacteria, harmful for humans, beneficial for bacteria, because it increases that specific type of bacteria's ability to reproduce. It leads to an evolutionary change or a change in frequency of that population's traits. Whereas before we had a small population of resistant bacteria, and at the end we have a large population of bacteria resistant. Alrighty. So questions. I know that's my hope is that we're somewhat familiar with this antibiotic resistant bacteria already, and that putting that extra bit of spin of context on it allows for that connection to be made. All right. So let's take a look at how there are other effects of humans on humans with regards to evolutionary changes. Pesticide resistance is one that I love to talk about because, 50 years ago, when insects started to eat more crops that we planted, human beings are really good at solving problems. So we developed this poison that killed insects, and it kept our crops happy and alive and growing, and corn and wheat and all that jazz was able to continue to be pumped out on large scales to feed all the humans that existed. Now, the only problem with this is insects also mutate. So we have these mutations that make them immune to pesticides. It would normally kill insects, but this mutation allowed for these insects to survive. So we kill off all these bugs. Pew, 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 pew. Get out of here, bugs. Save for one. And we tap ourselves on the shoulder. Bravo, everyone. Bravo. Look at this. This plant only has 3 bugs. Amazing. And then next season, there's the same amount of insects. And so we're like, no problem. Let's kill them with pesticides again. And then we only killed half. And people are like, well, what's happened? More pesticides. And eventually, we now have large populations of insects specific to certain types of crops that are completely resistant to pesticide. And it does nothing to have these crops sprayed with pesticide, except harm the crops, harm the animals in the area of the crops, and the human beings that are in the area of the crops. So these pests developed a resistance, and they, as a result, had a higher chance of successful reproduction. And we have a form of evolution that has occurred. This is a problem for humans because they destroy our food sources. On top of that, pesticides are not helpful in the context that we thought they were. They're actually quite harmful to human beings. And we are slowly, too slowly, but slowly moving away from its uses wide scale. So it's interesting to consider that human beings are very good at solving problems that create even bigger problems for ourselves, but we're learning. My hope is that by the time your generation is in power to make decisions, you can look at some of these things and remember these learnings and hopefully make choices that will be good for not only all of us, but for where we live as well. Another and very pertinent example with regards to the effects on humans is the idea of the influenza virus. Now, the flu is something that is constantly evolving and changing because they are genetic machines in some way, shape, or form. Whether you consider them alive is a completely different argument. But a new flu vaccine is required every year because the virus changes significantly. Since the previous year, this old vaccine would no longer work to treat the new virus. And we're starting to see some aspects of that kind of come up in COVID. So every COVID season, as we will call it from now on, I suspect, we will be concerned with the strain that we are going to vaccinate against. And the hope is that if we can get it correct, it will reduce the numbers and we will see good things happen as a result of that. So it's interesting the way they do it. Virologists and evolutionary biologists come together and they look at the genetic information of the flu towards the tail end of the season. And even as flu season starts in October-ish, right? And as it moves through the months all the way until Jan, Feb, a bit of March, and it starts to wind down, because it's moved through so many people, it's actually started to mutate. And at the end of flu season, they look at the last 1,000 cases of the flu and they take samples from that flu and they determine what the strain has evolved into. And they use that to make the vaccine for next year. So it's very interesting to see how they do it. It's fascinating. I have a friend who works in that field and I'm constantly amazed at the amazing things that she can do. All right. The last thing I want to talk about with regards to the importance of this lesson is the ideas of selective breeding and artificial selection of traits. Domestication is the breeding of organisms for human use. We also call it artificial selection. That's the main way that I will call it, because breeding usually implies animals. There's some aspects with regards to plants as well, but artificial selection is the main thing that I want to spend time talking about, because artificial, we initiate and control the breeding. Selection is we select the traits that which we want to see in those offspring. And as a result of what we want and what we need, we breed those animals or those plants or those bacteria or what have you based on those requirements. All right. So some examples of selective breeding. We have taken wolves, for lack of a better word, and we've turned them into border collies. We've turned them into Dobermans. We've turned them into pugs. We've turned them into Chihuahuas. We've turned them into Labradors, Labradoodles, poodles, everything in between. We have turned the initial species of wolves, Canis majoris, into all 1,287 species of dogs, or however many ridiculous. I made that number up. Don't quote me on that. However many ridiculous number of dog species we have now. So all of them stem from one specific wolf species. Another really cool example is the Brassica oleracea. Brassica oleracea, which is a coniferous leafing, flowering vegetable that's kind of edible. It tastes kind of like mustardy. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about when I say that, but that Brassica oleracea has been turned into 6 different types of species that we are finding quite edible today. For example, kohlrabi, which had its modified trait being its stem. Kale, the leaves were made to be bigger and softer. Broccoli, flowering buds were allowed to, to be selected for, as well as taller stems. The Brussels sprouts are the lateral leaf bud version of it. Cabbage, which is a terminal leaf bud version of it. And cauliflower, which is the flowering buds and short stem version of that Brassica oleracea. So all 6 of those vegetables, if you've had any, I think the vast majority of people have not had kohlrabi. Am I correct in that assumption? You've had kale, I think. You've had broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower. Whether you like it or not is a completely different story. I think if you cook it well, you'll enjoy it, but that's my take on things. Kohlrabi seems to be the one that most students have never had or don't really know what it is. And I encourage you to look at it. Go grocery shopping. Well, maybe not go grocery shopping with your parents, but next time your parents go grocery shopping, say, hey, keep an eye out for kohlrabi. And then you can send them to me to complain because they're like, I don't know what kohlrabi is. But yeah, all 6 of these vegetables came from one specific species, and we selectively bred over many generations to get those traits that we wanted. Do I like kohlrabi? Yeah, I like kohlrabi. I like all of the brassica families. I love kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower. They're all great if they're cooked correctly. I think if you cook any vegetable incorrectly, it sucks. But if you roast it, get some salt, pepper on olive oil, a little bit of dressing on there, delicious, delicious. All right. So the last thing you should write down for your note as we finish up this lesson is the idea of the process for breeding. There's 6 main steps. The first is you choose a useful species that can be bred in captivity. So like that Brassica, it's edible, but we can make it better. We keep it in captivity. We breed it just like Mendel did with those pea plants, and we breed large numbers of those individuals. Having them be self-pollinating is very good. Having them produce large quantities of offsprings like dogs or wolves, very good. We then select a trait that we want to select for. We choose that trait like size, color, flavor, texture, whatever it is, right? We identify those individuals who show those traits, right? So in the case of the Brassica, we want to find individuals that have that short stem. We want to find individuals that have the bigger leaves. And then once we find that trait and we start to identify it, we then breed the selected individuals to produce the next generations. And then we repeat steps 4 and 5 until several generations, thousands of generations have passed. And we get the Brassica's leaves turning into kale's leaves, or the Brassica's flowering bud system to turn into the broccoli or cauliflower. All right. So the last thing to talk about is a little bit of modern breeding techniques. Genetically modified individual organisms. We can take the beneficial traits from a different species and put them into a completely other species. We talked a little bit about it with regards to insulin production. There are benefits, obviously. There are ethical issues, obviously. I would encourage you to watch this video. I find it fascinating to reflect on the problems and the benefits. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, correct or wrong. I think it's important to watch. Find some time later today at the end of class to watch it. And then I've given you the homework textbook question answers because everyone had a million answers or questions about these the last time I taught it. So I just copy and pasted my answers into the note. But I still strongly encourage you to look through section 7.1. Page 287 is 1 to 5, question 8 as well, and work through those homework problems tonight. Okay, folks? So we got about 10, 15 minutes left of class. If you want to stick around and ask questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to head out and work on this homework, work on your assignment out of the Zoom, I will support that as well. I'll stick around for the next 10 minutes to answer any and all questions. Otherwise, folks, great second day back. I will see you all online tomorrow. I did a double major in psychology and biology, and I minored in statistics, Kyle. That was my focus in university. So I did double major biopsych and then minor in statistics. Yeah, I loved it. I went to Ryerson. I love it. I have nothing but great things to say about Ryerson. My professors were great. In my 3rd and 4th year, my classes had about 40 kids in it total, some even less. One class I had 10 kids. The professor sat down with us. She brought wine and cheese and snacks at our last day of class before we graduated. And she was nothing but excellent. I still send her emails from time to time. Dr. Tisha Ornstein was an excellent professor. I had her for many classes. Amazing, amazing. Do they have an animal biology program? I don't know, actually, Diana. That's a good question. I don't remember taking zoology in the classical sense. I don't know. They might. Honestly, though, like I went to undergrad a long time ago, right? So it's definitely different from what it is now, I think. But yeah, I have nothing but great things to say about my experience at Ryerson. They do have biochem, yes. Several of my biology classes were taken with people in biochem, and they looked more tired than I was. Yeah, no problem, Tanya. Yeah, I know you're all starting to think about that now. I will always forever pump up Ryerson University as a great alternative to U of T, simply because of the location, but also I think it's got a lot of really good programs. So yeah, folks, if you ever have questions about that stuff, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer any and all that stuff. People who get into chem are insane. Yes, I feel that way about people who are in math and physics as well. They got a lot on their table, a lot on their plate, sorry. All right, folks, if you're heading out for the day, I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, everyone. Study hard today, yeah? You got 10 minutes still left of technical class. Get some work done going, yeah? See you later, folks. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.